Tell me a bit about yourself.
My name's Kenrick Riley. I'm a farmer on Wickerwood at Georgica, which is at the top of the Jigai Valley in the Northern Rivers. I'm 60 odd this year, 60 this year. Background was as a kid growing up in the bush in Western Queensland, and escaped and worked in the media for, I don't know, 10 years or something, and then worked for government for 10 years, and then came back to farming. Came down here in 95, 96, and that's when we left Brisbane and started farming here again in 2000, 14 years ago.
Okay, cool. And so what got you specifically into organic farming?
We'd always had veggie beds in our houses in Brisbane or Townsville or wherever we lived in town. We'd always had veggie beds, and I guess we just gravitated towards growing naturally. The same as I sort of remember my mum growing veggies when I was a kid. There was, I suppose we didn't really want to have to venture into use of poisons and anything like that anyway. And with a backyard veggie patch, you don't need to. So the way we'd always grown our veggies and that in the city was the way we really started growing them when we moved to the bush again. It's just that it was a bigger garden and bigger, problems to solve along with it. But there was no real need to want to venture down the road of using poisons.
Okay. Would you be able to explain to me some of the interesting things that you've learned since starting farming on a larger scale?
Yeah, the first is how much knowledge I didn't have, because I come from a grazing background with sheep and cattle and had never done any training or any education or anything in tilling the soil and that form of farming. So it's been a monstrous learning curve here, particularly as there's no other, or very few other farmers in this valley who are doing what we're doing, which is growing a market garden. There's people around here who've mainly got cows that they're using to eat grass, and a lot of them have a job in town. So we're probably the only market garden in the valley. And not having anyone as a mentor makes it very difficult, because everything we do we've had to learn from reading or looking on the internet or doing an awful lot of trial and error. And that leads to as much error as it does trial. So with things like, specific things like how you farm this heavy black soil, there was no information at all. And we've made a lot of mistakes in the way that we've tilled the soil to try and get it friable over the years. And it's only been in the last year or so that we've started to wake up to some of the really important things, like getting the most amount of organic matter into the soil that you possibly can. And for us now, we've got a mulch harvester. We actually go out and harvest mulch and lay it down on beds and plough it in. Little things like that, and because they make all the difference to things like pH levels and heavy amounts of clay in the soil. There's whole lots of bags of powder and everything you can put on to do that, but if you put on a few pitchforkfuls of mulch and plough it into the soil, then 90% of those other problems go away. If you can get the organic matter back again into your soil. And in this country here, where they grazed it for so long, they'd be running 100 bullocks on 100 acres here, which was overgrazing to buggery and compacting the soil down really hard. It meant that a lot of the organic matter had been compacted out of the soil. And no matter what you might do to rip it and plough it and everything else, until you can get organic matter back into the soil, it's never ever going to produce for you. It'll just keep turning back to clay. So that's probably been an example of things we've had to find out, because we're farming on our own a little bit without having other mentors that we can draw on to give us some localised advice.
No, that's one of the reasons. I thought this would be a good idea to go around and interview a lot of different farmers, because I find that there's most farmers that I speak to, they say, "Oh, well, I've had to do it all by trial and error," because there isn't anyone to sort of bounce ideas off.
Yeah. And that probably applies more particularly so even to organic farming too, because there's plenty of instructions around for chemical farming.
Yeah.
and put out by the DPI and everything like that. But much less of it that's related purely to organic or biodynamic farming.
And so for someone who doesn't know what organic farming is, would you be able to explain that?
Oh, organic farming really is about focusing on the soil and getting the quality of the soil to a very high standard, so that everything after that, if you've got a very healthy organic soil, then it's going to grow a healthy plant. A healthy plant is going to repel most of the pests that want to eat it or infest it. And a healthy plant also is going to have the highest amounts of micronutrients and sugars and other things that are needed in good food. So organic farming for us really is about working to get a really high quality soil that we can farm in.
Okay. And do you know much of the history of organic farming in Australia?
Not a great amount, Jai. I know that it probably kicked off more with the biodynamics, I think, than organics, because biodynamics was introduced into Australia, I think, as a farming system before there was a standardised method of organic farming. And I think organic farming came out of that early influence of biodynamics. There are quite a few biodynamic farmers down south, southern New South Wales, Victoria, that had farming groups set up a good while back. And I think organic farming came out of that because after biodynamic farming would have got established here as a system, then there would have been other people that were interested in farming that way, but really looking more at it from the point of view of coming into farming and trying to get rid of the chemicals that were making them sick and things like that, without then going further on to what really is the Rolls Royce of organic farming, which is biodynamics.
So could you explain some of the differences between organic and biodynamic farming?
Very similar. The difference is that biodynamics uses a number of preparations that are used in compost that are added to soils, which are prepared every year and applied every year, or sometimes a couple of times a year. What else with biodynamics and organics? There's also a lot of study has been done with biodynamics about planting by the moon, and that's planting and harvesting by the moon and picking the right days on a moon cycle to plough and things like that. So there's a lot of science goes in on the lunar systems as well with BD that a lot of organic farmers probably don't worry too much about.
Okay.
We tend to utilise a bit of both.
Yeah.
We're not serious biodynamic farmers, but we've tapped into a lot of things that BD farmers do, and have incorporated them into our system here. I mean, we pinched a bit off permaculture as well, so
And is
doesn't hurt to borrow good ideas, I reckon.
And is that out of necessity, like because it actually works, or you sort of had problems and you needed to solve them, or?
I think we came to the use of biodynamic philosophies. From a philosophical point of view, just from reading about other BD farmers and how they'd managed to improve their country and their farm, and thinking, well, maybe that's worth trying. You can't do long-term empirical studies in what we're doing, so we don't have a way of being able to set aside two different areas and treat one with BD and not treat the other one with BD and be able to say definitively, yes, well, that one works and that one doesn't. So there's a lot of those things we do just because we do, and without having any more than a hunch, really, that they're actually doing good.
Okay. Would you be able to tell me about organic certification?
Yeah, certification.
And what that is?
Yep. Organic certification is the process that any organic farmer goes through when they want to be listed as a certified organic farmer. And the advantage of having that certification is, for example, like me at the Byron Farmers Market, I can put a sign up there that says certified organic. And what that means is that the customer then is quite clear about what sort of produce they're buying off me. There's plenty of people that say that they don't use sprays and that sort of stuff, which means that they're getting away from chemical farming, but they're probably still using poisons in other areas of their farm. Whereas with a certified organic farm, then there's no poison used anywhere. Everything is just done naturally. And the process of getting that certification is to apply to one of the organic organisations, and they will send some information out, and they send out an auditor who comes out and visits the farm and makes a whole stack of notes and asks a whole stack of questions and gets us to document a whole lot of information about our management plan, our farming practices, some of the problems we have. They want to know how much of our country is let go back to natural scrub and bush as opposed to how much is being farmed. Want to know information about wildlife types and things like that. Excuse me. And the outcome of all that is that the auditor goes back and writes a report on the farm, which is tendered back to the certification body, and in there there's an opinion given about whether that person is ready to to be considered as an organic farmer and whether their system is good enough to fit within the guidelines. And once they say yes, you are, then you enter a 2-year monitoring period, which is called in conversion, and that means your product is still not classified as being organic, as in A-grade organic, but it acknowledges the fact that you're no longer using a conventional farming practice, and you're moving down the road towards a full A-grade certification. And after your 3rd year, then provided all your audits go well, then you're considered as an A-grade farmer.
Okay, and how important do you think organic certification is?
It's important if you want to sell your product to someone who doesn't know you. Then the only way they can ensure that your product is any good if it's got a badge on it that says it's certified A-grade organic. Now, in circumstances where, say, customers that have been with me at Byron Bay for 10 years, they would know the quality of our product, they know what it's like. Some of them have been to the farm, they would be able to see what we're doing. But even then, for those people, there's no guarantee that they can actually go onto a farm and make a decision about whether it's organic or not. So it's an essential part of being able to market a product, to have that certificate there that guarantees that what you're selling is what you're selling. It's also very important for a lot of customers, any customers that have developed problems where they're having a reaction to certain types of foods. Sometimes it may be a reaction not so much to the food itself, but to some of the chemicals that have been used on it. And they're in a situation where they have to go and find pure organic food. They don't have any choice. And the only way that they can guarantee themselves that they're going to get the type of stuff they're after is to go around and look and find out who's got the organic certification mark and then buy from them.
Because as far as you're aware, are organic farmers allowed to use any herbicides or pesticides?
No. I think there's a product called, I forget what it's called now. Some people use it for caterpillars, and it tends to be it's a dust that's made from some natural source or something like that, and it's used to kill caterpillars. We don't use it for the same reason that we don't really want to use any poisons.
Yeah.
Because once you start spraying poisons around, even if it's a poison that's not going to necessarily be of any great harm to human beings, you find it's going to kill a whole lot of other bugs out there that are good bugs. And if you're just indiscriminately throwing this stuff about, then you're going to be doing as much damage as you are good. Sometimes the best thing is if you've got a few caterpillars is to go out there and squeeze them, because you can often get as much done in an hour's removing caterpillars as you probably can with an hour's running around putting on expensive poison, even if it has been allowed. So I don't know, because I'm not in the market looking for those things, I don't really know what is and what isn't. I think they had a herbicide once that was based on vinegar or something like that, but it was hellishly expensive, and I don't know how well it worked in the end anyway, so it's not a topic I'm very, very clear on.
That's all right. Would you be able to describe for me some of the misconceptions about organic farming?
In what way? What sort of misconceptions?
Well, do you think there's any misconceptions about organic farming?
Oh, I think the only one, and it's been the perennial one, has been farmers that aren't sincere, and so they've gone through an organic certification system, and have got an A grade certificate, but then somehow or other are lapsing back into old ways and are using poisons and trying to hide the use thereof. I don't think it ever works because a decent auditor is always going to know anyway. Other misconceptions, I suppose, price. The price of organic product in the city can be quite expensive, and yet when you see it at the organic farmers market, I think my products tend to be 5 or 10% dearer than what other similar products are that are grown with poisons. So I don't really call 10% as a hellishly dear product in comparison, but I understand that some organic prices can be quite high in the city. Now, whether that's a perception or not, I don't know.
Do you think that might be because of how the supply chain works, of like the wholesalers and the resellers, like from the grower to the actual consumer?
Well, again, Jai, it could be, but because, see, we've never been mixed up in any sale of our product via agents or anything like that. We've never sent it to Sydney or Brisbane. And so I'm not really clear on how any of that works anyway. Our sales have always been direct to the public, without any people in the middle.
And so why did you choose to do it that way?
Initially, because of the amount of product that we had. See, we started here, just with a couple of big garden beds, and the small amount that we were growing meant that there was never any viability in thinking about putting it on a truck and sending it to Sydney, because for 2 boxes of stuff, by the time you paid the freight and the agent's fees and everything else, you'd end up probably making a loss on it altogether. You'd have to be sending large amounts to be able to capitalise on that system. So from the outset, we were always going to be tied into a system where we could sell it at markets. Initially, it was at the Sunday markets around the Northern Rivers, and then once the farmers market started up, we've just been exclusively selling with farmers markets.
Okay.
All of our product goes to farmers markets.
Yeah. And so, would you say that it's true that all food was previously organic?
Yeah, as in a century ago.
Yeah.
Or more, basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Organic in that it wasn't being grown with artificial chemicals, and well, of course I don't know, but I think most of the heavy use of chemicals came about during the 20th century. So 100 years ago, I would say most people were probably still working their soils in a purely organic system. Yeah, I guess, I don't know.
Okay. In your opinion, are organic farms more productive or as productive as conventional farms?
Hard for me to compare. The feedback I get is that they can be as productive as a conventional farm, and while the organic farmers may need to spend a bit more on staff because they do a lot of manual jobs that conventional farmers use poisons to do, like killing weeds and killing insects and that sort of stuff. Organic farmers might have a higher wage bill. They're not spending $100,000 a year on a herbicide. And I think why that's really pertinent is if you've got a conventional wheat grower there and an organic wheat grower here, then at the beginning of the season, the conventional wheat grower is going to be buying thousands of dollars worth of fertiliser and putting that into soil. They're going to be buying thousands of dollars worth of herbicides and spraying the soil to kill any weeds that are going to grow and compete with the wheat. Between artificial fertilisers and artificial chemicals, a conventional farmer might, for example, spend $100,000 in that pre-season to get the crop ready, whereas the organic farmer would have spent very little, and maybe nothing if you exclude the use of green manure crops for for fertilising, then the actual expenditure outlay is going to be quite small for an organic farmer. Where it gets interesting is if then both those farmers go into a dry time or drought, and neither of them can harvest a decent crop, then the one that spent the $100,000 up front, putting all that stuff in the soil, has lost $100,000, and the other person has lost very little. So I think ultimately the returns for organic farming in the long run are going to be better, because you've got less of those big risk expenses that conventional farmers are always committed to.
Interesting. I've never really thought about it like that.
Yeah, conventional farming is expensive. You go and look at a 20-litre drum of something in Landmark or something like that, and just out of interest ask them how much it's worth, and it's bloody expensive. Bloody expensive. And then you've got to dress up in a moon suit to do anything with it if you've got any brains. And then, you've got to live with the fact that you're basically putting poison on everything you sell. I'd have a philosophical problem with that right from the outset. So, yeah, but it's conventional farming is hellishly expensive in the setup.
So can you tell me what makes your farm different and unique compared to other farms in this area?
We're probably not too much different from any other organic farmers around the place. What's unique about here? We don't have any livestock, so we don't have any fencing. We have a lot of wallabies and native wildlife that have come back here since we've been farming here. A lot of birds have come back. We haven't got cats and dogs. A lot of birds, a lot of native wildlife have reintroduced themselves to here. We've let a lot of country here go back to natural scrub. Anything that's too hilly, that was all cleared here years ago to grow bananas and things like that. We've let all that country go back to scrub. So we've now got brush turkeys that have come back into the hillsides of the back here. Buggers come out and dig us up occasionally too. But then just in the last couple of months we've been hearing a koala up the back. So little things like that. I mean, to be able to marry together a system of farming along with a system of nature conservation is quite fun and not difficult. I mean, all you really got to do with a lot of things like that is just leave well enough alone and let nature get on with its job and let it repair what's been buggered up in the past. And we planted about 10,000 trees all over this area back in 1996. It was quite bare here. There weren't a lot of trees at all. And of course those trees now, they're approaching 20-year-old and have made a big difference here from the point of view, again, of being corridors for wildlife. The mere fact that the westerly wind here now blows in the afternoons through a whole lot of forest that we planted means that by the time that wind gets to here, it's 4 or 5 degrees cooler. So life is a lot more pleasant just to live here because of some of the things that we've done. The only other thing that's a little bit unusual here, probably from our point of view, is that this is a community with 5 shares on it. The other shareholders aren't farming. We're the only ones that are farming here, but we're actually part of a community here in Georgia as well. I guess that's another point of difference. Okay.
And could you tell me about the different inputs that you use?
We use some composted chicken fertiliser, which we buy in bags. We don't have to use very much of that, but it can be very handy halfway through the growing of a crop. If you put seedlings into a freshly prepared bed that's had some compost and some green manure and everything ploughed back into it, if it's a long growing crop, then about halfway through its life, it's going to need another feed. So the best thing to do then is to give it a little half handful of fertiliser. We buy a certified organic compost from Mara, further out west from here. And we like to spread that down our beds before we plough them ready for planting, because it gets some organic matter, additional organic matter back into the soil. What other inputs? Water, and we do a biodynamic a BD 500 spray a couple of times a year. that's probably about it. I used to use a bit of lime and a bit of gypsum, but I'm finding that by getting more and more organic matter into the soil, there's less and less need to use. And I probably haven't used any of that for over a year now, I guess. And the way the soil's going, it may be that we won't have to use those inputs again. We found that one of the most important things here, because this country had been so badly compacted, is even though we've been tilling the top 7 or 8 inches of the soil and slowly improving that, plants were still putting their roots down and hitting this very hard packed layer of clay, which meant that water wasn't getting away, so plants were getting waterlogged. They couldn't get their roots down deep, which meant they were always stressed because they were always looking for water when it was dry. And a couple of years ago we borrowed a deep ripper, and now wherever we're going to do any farming or anything, we make sure we always put the deep ripper through first and just bust up that very, very deep and hard pan that's in the soil underneath, and then start to work the topsoil. And that has made a huge amount of difference. It's introduced a little bit more clay back into the topsoil, which will take a year or two to break down. But the mere fact that all of a sudden plants can get their roots down. I mean, we've been able to grow horseradish here the last couple of years, which we could never grow because the horseradish would grow that long and then the roots would just go horizontal. Whereas now the horseradish will grow, quite a deep root, which it would never do before. And that's purely and simply because we're getting rid of that hard pan with a deep ripper.
And would you be able to explain to me the importance of organic seeds?
We do two things. We buy organic seed in, and we save our own seed. The beauty about saving our own seed is we can go through the paddock during the growing of the crop, like basil or something like that. Now, in the process of harvesting that basil over 3 or 4 months, you'll always notice there's 3 or 4 plants that have never been eaten by bugs or anything, that are bigger, that are healthier, that just stand out as being a better quality plant from all the others. And what we've always made a habit of doing is tying a bit of pink tape around those, so that at the end of the season, when they all go brown and go to seed and they all look exactly the same, you can tell which were those 3 or 4 standout plants. And then you go and harvest the seed off those and keep that, and you can let the rest go. And that way, it's exactly the same as what I grew up with a kid on sheep and cattle stations, is with sheep. You always kept the very best of your sheep for yourself for breeding, and then you sold the second and third rate ones. So you always kept your absolute best for yourself. And it's the same with seeds, whether it's basil or cucumber or anything like that, is to go through and mark those plants that are standout extraordinary and save the seeds off those, and then use those, because they're indicative of plants that have already highly adapted to your soil type, your climate, your way of farming, and they've got an inbuilt resistance to slugs and snails and caterpillars and everything else. So it's important to do that. Buying organic seeds in, we find is handy when we're looking for a new crop. We want to trial something new. We like to introduce 1 or 2 new crops every year, just so our customers got something interesting to look at. So having certified organic seed available to buy is really important, because even though it comes from maybe another climate or another soil type, again, if you bring it in and plant it out, of the 20 plants that come out of that, there'll be 4 or 5 standouts, and then you start breeding from those again. And then the other thing that we've done from time to time is when we're looking for a particular plant or a particular crop, and we can't find it with certified organic seed, then what we do is we buy non-certified seed. So we buy conventional seed, and we ask and make sure it hasn't been treated with anything. They haven't dipped it in poison or anything like that. A lot of it isn't. So then we'll separate out a row, and we'll plant out this non-organic seed and get it going. And what you do with that one is you plant them all out, and again you select your best off that. You can't sell anything off that crop because it's grown with conventional seed. But what you do is you save your seed off those conventional plants. You save your seed off that, and then you can plant that the following year as an organic seed because it's been produced on your farm. So it's a 2-year process of introducing a new crop if there's no organic seed around. But it's worth it in the long run. You know, we've had to do that with a number of crops over the years, like jicama and things like that we now grow a lot of. when we first went looking for that, there was no organic seed anywhere, so we had to go through the process of buying conventional seed and converting it. The other thing that happens with us a lot of our customers give us cutting or seeds or something that they've grown in their backyard that's unusual that they'd like us to have, or as happens in a lot of cases, customers are moving. They're leaving one house and moving to another place, and they've had a veggie patch or a shrub or something growing in their backyard or a food plant, and they haven't sorted out their next place to go to, and if they have, it hasn't got a veggie patch, they've got nowhere to plant it, so they give it to us, and then we stick it in the ground, and that way they can get it back, either as a cutting, or if they decide not to grow it anymore. If it's any good to us, we've turned it into a crop, and then we start producing it. So we've had quite a few. There'll be 3 or 4 regular crops we grow now that have actually come from our customers over the years.
Is that how you come across new varieties? Like
that and research.
Yeah.
The organic seed company send out a catalogue once or twice a year, and there's about 3 or 4 of those. So we've always got new catalogues to have a look through. The internet's another great spot of just going on to gardening sites and finding out who's doing what. But yeah, customers. Yeah, a lot of customers will come and say, "Why don't you grow this?" Or "Have you thought about growing that?" Or saying, I was out somewhere and I saw this growing. It's a great crop, and then you can Google it and track it down and find out if it's going to work here in the first place, and if it is, then go hunting the seed.
So how do you deal with pests?
Pests?
Yeah.
Oh, like wallabies. Fence them out. Make sure that there's enough country slash to give them enough green feed, so that they tend to look for their own feed rather than coming hunting our stuff. Caterpillars, generally we try and get down the plants once a week or once a fortnight, or when we're hand watering is often a good time. In these dry times we hand water because we're conserving water, and as you're walking down a road with a hose, it's very easy just to look down into the top of a kale or something like that, and you'll soon know if there's a caterpillar there. Either there's some holes where edges been eaten off the leaves, or there'll be a pile of green caterpillar shit down the middle, and then it only takes a second, and then you'll find a caterpillar, and you just squash them and leave them there as a message to the others not to lay any more eggs there. And weeds, we mostly brush cut. We brush cut the pathways between the crops. We use an awful lot of mulch. We have a mulch harvester that goes on the back of a tractor, so whenever we've ploughed up a bed that we're going to plant in, the first thing we do is we pitchfork down a very thick layer of mulch, because that holds the moisture in, but mainly it suppresses weeds. And then you just dig a little hole in the top of the mulch and put your seedling in, and then close the mulch back up around it. And that way, your seedling can grow on straight away without having any competition from weeds, and it means we're not out there all the time weeding either.
And so are they the only pests that you have?
Yeah, caterpillars in the winter, I suppose. On things like kale, sometimes you'll get a little bit of rust in a sorrel or something like that, but generally that's when it's dry time and the plants are stressed. If they're stressed during a dry time, then often they'll get a little red spot on them somewhere, which seems to be a bit of a rust that they get when they're stressed, but not really. I mean, the other thing that we do is we just don't grow plants that aren't going to thrive here. When we originally came here, we wanted an orchard, and we had peaches and we had plums and we had a whole lot of those sort of things, and of course they just brought in fruit fly from all over the place, which stayed, and then the fruit fly wanted to get in and eat our cherry tomatoes. So we made the decision in the end, thought, well, this is really silly, so we chopped down all the stone fruit tree that were attracting the fruit fly, and we haven't really had a problem since. So part of it is not trying to persevere with something that doesn't want to grow here. And you can tell pretty quick. I mean, you put all the seeds in or put cuttings in or whatever, and in that first year, you'll have a pretty good idea if 5 out of the 20 plants do really well, then it's probably worthwhile taking seed off those and going again the following year. If there's only one plant and none of those ones do any good, then you're either unlucky enough to get a really bad batch of seed, or that plant just doesn't want to grow here. It's either too hot or too cold or too wet or too dry. And sometimes you're just better off to cut them loose And if they're just making too much work for you because you're having to look after them all the time, you're better off to cut them loose and go and find something else that can cope with these circumstances a lot better.
And so, how do you make your own compost, or do you make your own compost?
Only a little bit. We make Ray makes about 4 or 5 compost bins at any one time, which comes from the waste from harvesting and things like that. And sometimes we buy in some horse manure and put it through the compost. We don't make large quantities of compost here because we don't have the machinery or anything to be able to do it. So we use our own home compost for when planting our seedlings, because it's a really lovely, rich compost to use. And if you put half a handful in with every seedling, it'll keep them going for a long time before they need any other feed. But with the large amounts of compost that we use for ploughing in preparation to planting stuff, we buy that in. Plenty of people nowadays make it, and it's becoming less and less expensive all the time. So from our point of view, it's actually better to support someone who knows how to do it well and buy from them. One day we might be able to do it, but it'll require extra machinery and a lot of skill and time and effort and everything to put into it.
And so, can you tell me about some of the interesting things you grow here?
We do about 85 different crops throughout the year. Most of them are Asian food oriented, I guess, tropical to subtropical plants. Unusual, we grow a South Pacific hibiscus shrub called Ibeka, which was introduced to us by the Seed Savers Network, actually, over at Byron Bay, and a couple of customers have given me cuttings of different types. It's one we've introduced from scratch because it wasn't being grown or sold here before, and it's turned out to be a fairly popular one because it's a high protein leaf, Ibeka. We grow jicama, which is a Mexican root crop, which is sweet and crunchy. Apart from that, we do Brazil spinach, which is an unusual ground cover, which produces a spinach type. Again, I got that from a customer. Although since I found it all over the internet, and it's a fairly common plant, it's just that it wasn't being grown here all that commonly. They're probably examples of the more unusual ones, but then we do a lot of traditionals, like we do basil for the summer. We'll do okra, we'll do a few rosellas, we do a lot of perennial spinach, we do a lot of kale, we do a lot of mustard greens. So we tend to have a mixture of fairly typical leafy greens, and then some atypical crops to match it up. And I guess the other thing we do a little bit of garlic, but not a lot of garlic. We use it in some of our curry packs, garlic, but we also do a lot of turmeric. This heavy black soil, the one thing it can grow is turmeric. Turmeric's a fairly tough plant, and even if the soil tends to be fairly high clay and not all that probably conducive to growing a good leafy green, turmeric will still do well in it. So if we've got a paddock that we think is not quite up to scratch, then we'll tend to plough it up and put turmeric in there. It tends to be a bit of a soil improver anyway, it seems, but at least you'll get a crop out of that paddock, whereas you might not get a crop of basil out of it.
So when you say 85 different varieties, that seems like quite a lot compared to other farmers. Is there a reason why you do such a diverse range?
Yeah, we do a lot of mixed bunches. So we at Byron Day we do a mixed herb bunch, which might have 15 or 17 different herbs in it. So you need a lot of little patches of a variety of different herbs to be able to produce that one sale item, that bunch. Same thing at Bungalow Market, we do a mixed stir fry bunch, which has probably got about 10 different leafy greens in it. And with the stir fry bunches, it's always nice to have some different looking leaves in there. So we'll use Oric, which is a red mountain spinach. And it looks good in the stir fry bunch because it's red and everything else is greeny bluey colour. So we grow things like that, like Oric, purely to go into the mixed bunches. And there'd be a high percentage of our crops that we grow are being grown for those sort of purposes, to go into curry paste or mixed bunches or something like that. And we wouldn't necessarily sell them as a separate bunch on their own. but we need to grow them because they've got to be part of a whole. So that tends to bump our numbers up a bit. Also, we've never ever wanted to just focus on one or two crops and produce huge amounts of it. Our experience tells us that as soon as you do that and you go to the market, then you'll flood the market and nobody wants to buy that amount of stuff. We're better off to grow smaller quantities of a greater variety of veggies and herbs and take those to the market. So you've only got to sell 10 bunches or something rather than 100 bunches. A lot easier to sell 10 bunches than 100.
And how does that affect like the diversity of your farm? Like, does it mean that there's less pests, or?
Yeah, well, you presume so, don't you? The theory with pests is that if there's a lot of different plants around, then it's more difficult for them to hunt through all those different plants to find that one that they're after. And if they're gone hunting a kale or something like that and it's surrounded by a whole bunch of different things, it makes it difficult for them. In practice, though, it's much better for us to grow our kale in a long single row because you've got to go along one morning and harvest it and you want to be able to do that quickly. What we try not to do is we try not to grow 2 rows of kale side by side or 2 rows of spinach side by side. We always try and make sure that we alternate through. So if there's a row of kale there, it might be 5 or 6 rows up that paddock before the next row of kale, which means that an animal has got to negotiate a long way if it wants to go and eat another lot. Now, a caterpillar physically can't do that. If your plants are too close together, then a caterpillar can walk from one to the other where the leaves are touching. But if you space your plants out enough, which also allows them to grow better, then you limit your problem to one plant. So the variety of different things that we grow, yes, would lead to much greater diversity just naturally because we've got so many more things growing. And I suspect subtly it really does help in suppressing some of the insect problems as well.
Okay. Can you tell me about some of the things you enjoy about farming?
Oh, it's really going to the market, I think. Going to the market's it was probably ever thus, but going to the market is like a social day out. I'm sure an old farmer 100 years ago driving his pigs to the market would have had exactly the same experience. You know, you go and take all your pigs in town, you sell them, and then you wander off into the pub or something and have a good time or buy something and go home. But going to the market is probably the most enjoyable part of the whole thing because A, it is a social day out. B, also you get a lot of benefit from your customers because they're giving you feedback all the time on your produce, which you don't get when you sell to an agent in Sydney or Brisbane. They're going to ring up and tell you how good your stuff is. Whereas the customers that's bought something the week before and has enjoyed it will always come back and tell you and thank you and tell you. And that sort of feedback can make any job worthwhile. Other enjoyable things, I suppose, watching the slow improvement of things on the land, in the farm itself, seeing the return of the wallabies and the birds and the wildlife. Has been a really fun experience for both of us because we're both into animals, always have been, and without cats and dogs, and these are the next best lot. And that's about it. I suppose some of the development stuff is enjoyable in a way. Like there was no water here or anything; we had to build dams, and then of recent time, with us doing more hand watering, I'm running more pipelines underground and putting more taps in strategic locations so that we can always just run a hose to water something if needs be, rather than having to set up a big overhead sprinkler irrigation system. So the development side of it is also as enjoyable, and I think it's just the peace and quiet that you get from living on a farm rather than living in a high-rise block in the city and working in an office.
Is there anything you don't enjoy about farming?
Not really. I mean, in that everything we do here is a job. I suppose the only thing I don't enjoy about the fact is that with two of you working at a market garden, you've both pretty well got to be here all the time, and you both need to be working 7 days a week. So rarely do we ever get time off, as you'd call it. And then if we do, it's one at a time. So I might go away for 4 or 5 days to see my parents, and then Marie might go away for 4 or 5 days for the same reason. But one always stays at home because there's so many things that can go wrong when you're away, and without staff, you need to be there to do it. So I suppose the lack of time off, but I mean it's not something I moan much because again we get to sort of work in a lovely spot where it's not really a chore.
Cool, I like to hear that. So
It's not really a chore.
can you tell me the importance of farmers markets? Can you?
I guess, well, the importance of it is twofold. One, they're important for the farmers themselves, but they're also important for customers. For the farmer, for the small to medium-sized farmer, they provide a direct outlet, as we were talking beforehand, where you get the retail price, not the wholesale price. So instead of having to discount everything you sell when you go to send it off to the city, at a farmer's market you get the full price. So that's a great thing for farmers. You can, and because you're selling it at the full price, you can afford to sell a bit less. You don't have to grow quite as much to be able to make the same amount of money out of it, which means that there's a bit less pressure on a farmer to overproduce from their land, which means that they can give some of their country a bit of a spell. From a customer's point of view, I think the importance probably is having some means of being able to reconnect with how food's grown and where it's grown. Not everybody in the city can have a backyard veggie patch. It may have been that way 80 odd years ago, but nowadays an awful lot of people live in apartments and things like that, and there is just physically not the opportunity to be able to grow food. So a farmer's market, I think, provides people with that connect back to foods and how they're grown and who grows them, and some sort of surety about what it is that they're buying. To go into a supermarket and just blindly grab the first packet of whatever it is that you see, you really don't know what's there until you get home and have a close look at the packet. At least by going to a farmer's market, you can sit down and talk to the farmer and ask them about what it is they've grown and how they've grown it and why they've grown it and what's it good for and how would you cook it and things like that. There's a whole lot of information that a customer can pick up there that they don't really get from the supermarket per se. And I think also for a lot of customers, probably like us, it's a social day out, chance to go somewhere and buy some food and have a cup of coffee.
And what are your views on supermarkets, like the big supermarkets?
Oh, they're an opponent. They feed a huge amount of people. I think because they're pushing food to the lowest common denominator all the time, because they're entirely price driven, as opposed to where we have to be quality driven. That means that they're constantly on the search for things that are absolutely the cheapest, and so therefore it doesn't matter where it comes from. It could come from Mexico or China or Bullamakanka, it doesn't matter, provided it's the cheapest around, and often the cheapest, of course, then you end up with the poorest quality as a result. So I think the quality of food that would be going through supermarkets in the main would be reasonably poor when it comes to micronutrients and some of the essential things that you've got to have in your tucker. And I think also, this may be just an Australian thing, but the fact that there's really only a couple of major supermarkets nowadays means that from the point of view of farmers that are selling to them, they don't hold too many cards in the game at all. They don't really have any sort of a bargaining position to be in. So it's probably suppressing prices to conventional farmers even more, I would say. I think probably another thing that's about supermarkets is because there's a couple of generations of people now have grown up with the knowledge that that's where food comes from. So it creates a disconnect between people who eat food and people who grow food. The supermarket is the big agent in between all that. And the other thing is that they're one disaster away from a famine. If something happened and all the Woolworths trucks or something went off the road, then from what I hear, Woolworths only ever carries about 2 days worth of product. In 2 days' time, all the shops are empty of food. I mean, you've got a whole million people up there demanding food and it's not there. So I always think it's a bit of an interesting, dicky question, what happens to people if the supermarkets run out of food, because there's nowhere else they can get it at the moment. Everything in the city is just pretty well locked into the fact that the supermarket supplies the food. Yeah, well, not all of it. It must be bloody 95% of it, I'd reckon.
Yeah. Um, so what do you think the main, or what are the differences between organic and conventional foods?
Health, I think. I think a lot of it just comes back to health. And you pick that up often in taste. The difference in taste between different types of the same food invariably comes down to the amount of micronutrients that are in it. And they're little tiny things like calcium, selenium, and magnesium, whatever they are. There's a whole bunch of these micronutrients that can be produced in a plant that's growing in healthy soil that's got all those micronutrients available and can be taken up by the plant. A lot of conventional farming nowadays, the soil is pretty well buggered in a lot of cases. They're having to put in all the fertiliser, all the water to actually produce a plant, and it's a bit like broad-scale hydroponics really, because they're feeding everything to the plant through the water, and then they're just using the soil as a medium to stand the plant up in for convenience sake. And the fact that those soils have been over-farmed and overworked for so long means that a lot of those basic micronutrients that you need to get a good balance within a diet are just not there. They'll have some of the rudimentary nutrition in it, but a lot of the micronutrients, the little bits that the body still needs to be able to make it function properly, if they're not there, then the body's either going to get crook, or it's going to say you need to eat more and more of this because, I only got a little tiny squillion of magnesium out of that meal I just had. You have to have another meal that size for me to, to maybe get the amount of magnesium that I need. So you go and have another big meal the same size with all the added fat and everything in it because your body needs the micronutrients and it's taken on all this other stuff at the same time. I mean, all that's going to happen is just going to get fat. Your body's hungry for a micronutrient, but the outcome is going to be that you'll end up getting fat.
So would you say they're overfed and undernourished?
In a sense, yeah. Yeah, I've never heard that, but overfed and undernourished, yeah. And again, it's, I guess people probably wonder why they overeat. And I hear a lot of people saying, these people are just bloody fat and lazy because they won't run around and play footy like I did when I was a kid. Well, I don't know. I suspect a lot of these kids are probably trying to be just as active as anybody else. It's just that I think their body's on the hunt for some of the finer bits that you need in good food. And if it can't get it, it's going to tell the brain to eat more. Until it gets it somehow or other, and if it's got to put up with a whole bunch of excess fats and everything else, well, that's what it does. So, it's only a theory, but there seems to be an awful lot of people now carrying a lot of extra weight than they ever did, and I mean, there's more people playing football now than there ever were, so I just don't see that it's necessarily that we've bred a generation of lazy people. I think we've bred a generation of unhealthy plants.
Do you think organic food produce should be the standard?
Do I personally think that? Yeah, I do. Yeah. Is it going to happen? Not in the short term. And I mean, it's important to give people choice. It's up to people to make their own decisions about what sort of food they want to eat, how well they want to be. That's a purely personal decision. So yeah, I don't think you could ever end up with a situation where you would say, righto, well, the only way we're going to farm here is organic. I think it'd be great, because I think if we ever do get to a crisis of a situation where we can't feed our own people in our own country, it'll be because we've buggered up too much good farming land and it's just not producing anymore. And the land that will be producing food will be the organic land, because the quality of its soil will be improving, whereas the others are declining. So it may well come about in the long run that a lot of people will take up organic farming purely and simply because they want to stay farming. And the way they've been farming up until now has been too hellishly expensive, or it's resulted in soils that are no longer growing a crop and need to be fallow for 10 years and nothing done with them until they can.
Do you think it could be also a consumer decision as well?
Probably not. I think consumers will, 80% of consumers will always be driven by price, and 20% will be driven by health and other philosophies. If there was only organic farming, only organic food being produced, then everyone would be paying the same price probably, and therefore price wouldn't be an issue. But price has been a governing factor in buying food now for probably the last 50 or 60 years. It's going to take a while for that to go away. A famine will do it, of course. Good old famine.
So you hinted on it a little bit before about the price differences between organic and conventional. Would you be able to give me the example when you talked about your basil compared to the basil that you've seen like in Woolworths?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, because we often go into the supermarket and compare. We just want to make sure that we're getting our pricing about right. So, for example, we'll do a 150 gram bunch of basil and we'll sell it at the market for $2.50, and it'll be less than 24 hours old when we sell it. You can go into the supermarket sometimes and you'll find a 100 gram bunch of basil for $4. Which means that it's almost twice the price of what we're producing. Now that might be something that is more specific to specialty herbs. I dare say if you were to compare, say, spuds or something like that, if you were to look at organic spuds, I don't know what spuds are worth, but you might find that when you go into a supermarket that they'd be much cheaper to buy in bulk.
Well, it's funny. I look at like sweet potatoes, for instance, and I can get certified organic sweet potatoes cheaper than just Australian grown sweet potatoes in Coles or Woolies.
Is that right?
Yeah, if I buy them from the farmer's market.
Yeah.
Same thing with bananas.
Yep.
I can get certified organic bananas for $3 a kilo, and they're usually $5.50 at a supermarket.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's why a lot of farmers need to go and check prices. Farmers are always reluctant to put their prices up. Particularly after they've been selling to the same bunch of customers for 10 years, because they have a feeling of obligation to do the best they can for those customers. The last thing you want to do is put the price up. And yet your customer would be the first to say, well, you've got to make a bloody living, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to come here and sell to me next week anyway. So there's always that bit of a problem with farmers about, how do I actually ask the right price for my product? And they've probably had generations of people telling them their stuff's too dear anyway. Agents in the city saying, "Oh, your stuff's too expensive," So it's always good to go and compare prices in supermarkets. So what we like to think is that we can peg our price 10 to 20% above what the people are paying in the supermarket, and we think that probably is an indication of the fact that our product is better quality and is more healthy,
and it's fresher.
And it's fresher. That's the other thing, of course. Yeah, ours is a day old, whereas theirs is 5 days old sometimes. But that way, it's easier then for a farmer to say, "Oh, well, I really should put my price up to at least the Woolworths price, because because I'm growing as good or better product, and it's fresher, and not be afraid to do so." That's the other thing. I used to always worry about putting up my prices, and I'd put out a sign for a month beforehand saying, in August I'm going to put my bunch price up from $2 to $2.50, and most people said, "Yes, so?" Don't care. And I said, "Okay." So it's not, I suppose for the people who go to farmers markets are probably a unique breed in their own right, in that sense, in that they are looking more, they're shopping more on the level of quality than they are on price.
So could you explain the benefits of eating seasonally?
Seasonally? In a sense, my customers don't have a choice. They love coming to me in the middle of winter and say, "Do you have any basil?" And I remind them, and I say, "No, that's a summer crop." And after a couple of years, they'll walk in and say, "Do you have any basil?" "Oh, no, hang on, it's a summer crop." So our customers are in the habit now of knowing that certain things, are seasonal, and they're actually starting to learn what their seasons are as well. The benefits of eating seasonally, look, to be honest, I don't know what necessarily the health benefits of seasonal eating are. I suppose the disadvantages of eating things that are out of season is that they've been cold stored somewhere for a hell of a long time, and it's just a question then of what that does to the quality of the product. Anything that's eaten out of season has got to be preserved in some way, shape or form. If it's fermented or there's some added value way of preserving it, so that it can be used out of season, which was traditional way of doing things, then that'd be fine. Cold storage and stuff, I really don't know. I think there's an awful lot of gas goes in that you probably don't want to know about with stuff that's kept in cold storage over a long period of time. So there's probably a few dodgy health risks about eating things that way anyway. And I don't know, I just think the best thing about eating seasonally is you get that natural variety. You know, you just got to get into the habit of knowing you can't make pesto in winter. You know, if you are, make it out of rocket rather than basil or something like that. So.
And so, can you tell me about the alternatives to supermarkets?
Oh, Jai, look, because I'm a farmer and I live out here, I can only talk from my own experience. I buy, well, obviously we grow a fair bit of our own stuff anyway. And then the second line of stuff we buy is from other farmers at the farmers markets. So we buy another percentage of our weekly needs there. And then the third lot of stuff we buy from an organic shop in Nimbin or an organic shop in Lismore. And that provides us with stuff that we can't grow or we can't buy at the market because they haven't got it there organic or for whatever reason. And then the fourth thing we do is once every 6 months we go to the supermarket. And then we have a big stock up on things like toilet paper, packaging bags, things like that we can't buy anywhere else, and we need to get from a supermarket or a supplier somewhere in town. But generally we try and limit those trips to twice a year now, and then we just buy them in bulk and store them.
So, just to sum it up a bit, could you tell me about why you would choose organic over conventional food?
I'm the wrong bloke to ask, Joy. Need to talk to a customer about that. Me personally, for flavour, for taste, because there's, the comparison between a bland tomato and a lovely tomato is astonishing. So you put together 7 or 8 different food types into one meal and make it up out of an organic mix. It's just going to have a wonderful flavour to it, whereas others won't necessarily. Advantages, health, I guess. The fact that you're not ingesting poisons that have been put on by somebody else, and the fact that you're getting a better balance of nutrients within the food that you do buy organic, and particularly, as we were talking beforehand, about some of those micronutrients that you need and that are, in some cases, are just totally absent from conventional food altogether.
Cool. So, what's your advice for people who would want to learn more about organic food?
It's pretty well always on the internet these days. I'm a great Googler.
Yeah.
I don't know anything nowadays. I don't have to go back to university and learn it. I can just Google it. Finding out more about organic food. Excuse me. I suppose the simplest and easiest way is to go and talk to a farmer. In many respects, either talk to them at a market when they've got a bit of time, or if possible, go and see them on the farm. We get a few people just always curious to see where their food's grown and how it's grown, and the only way you can ever explain that is to bring them out here and show them. And I think that is probably as good a way for a lot of people to be able to learn about organic farming as such. Because you've got the opportunity for a whole bunch of questions and answers that come up while you're walking around the paddock. Things that wouldn't normally come up in a conversation at a market or in a pub or something like that, and may not necessarily be covered off by looking up organic farming sites on the internet. I think talking to somebody who grows the stuff, a farmer or a really good backyard veggie gardener or something like that, is probably going to be as simple and effective as any.
So what, if people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way to go about that?
Just at the market.
Yeah? And so what markets do you do?
Byron and Bungalow.
Oh yeah.
Byron on Thursday morning, Bungalow on Saturday morning. We don't ever sell anything from the farm here. We just pick it the day before and take it into the market. So all our stuff is for sale at either of those two markets. I get some people who will come in to the market and order stuff. They might need something specific. Often it tends to be chefs actually, caterers that are doing a specific larger job, and they need an unusual list of ingredients, or they need a large amount of a particular product that we might only take normally small amounts to the market. So occasionally I get orders, but I mean it's very rare that people need to ring me at the farm or anything to order stuff, because I'm seeing them every week at the market. They usually let me know what they need. They always let me know if I've forgotten it too, but they always let me know what I need to bring them.
Awesome. Thanks very much for your time today, Kenrick.
Yeah.
And can I just ask you permission to actually film this and put it up on the internet?
You have my full permission.
I'll definitely share it with you before I release it to everyone.
That's fine, Joy. Well done. That was fairly painless.
Yeah.
You've obviously done your homework. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
You've got to do your bloody homework.
I tried to.
If you've done your homework right, then you can always throw in an extra question that comes to you through the process of the interview. But if you haven't done any homework at all, you're going to run out of questions real quick before you're going to ask some that will lead you to other ones.
Well, that was the other thing, is I structured the questions so that they weren't leading so much, but then I still wrote down the specific question. Like, I wanted to ask you how many varieties of different things you grew, but you actually gave me that information without me having to ask for it, so I could just skip that question. Which I guess is a benefit to asking the open-ended questions, is that you can release the information in a more flowing manner.
What are you doing this for, by the way?
Well, I've got a few ideas at this stage, but one of the things I'd like to do is go and interview a whole range of farmers and make a documentary about it.
Yeah.
I guess because when we're talking the other day, like I asked you, I'm like, oh, why do you think people don't eat much organic food? And it's like, well, they really just don't know the difference. And I think there's just a sort of gap in the education and the understanding of what the difference is.
Yes, it would be, because there's nowhere logically they would have ever stumbled across that information.
So I guess I've just come across it because of, I don't know how, sort of just my background.
Yeah.
Like
I didn't leave a coffee pot running, did I?
No, I turned down and took it off when I heard it.
Oh, thanks. Well, I forgot all about it. I couldn't hear it. Oh, are we done with this?
We are.
Yeah. Sorry, Joy. Yeah.